Okay, first question, how does the participation of Black service members challenge or enrich our understanding of American history? First question.
Well, for one thing, I think it enriches American history, Black service members. In my research for my family, one of the things that I run across are military records, and I was able to find out that many of my family members have fought in just about every war. Back as far as I've been able to trace, I've found family members that fought in the Vietnam War. In fact, 3 of my brothers fought in the Vietnam War. I've had cousins that fought in the Korean War, cousins and uncles that fought in World War II, great and great uncles that fought in World War I, uncles that fought in the Spanish-American War. I have not found any Civil War veterans yet in my family, but I'm still looking.
I can pretty much echo what he said in reference to the research of finding family members that have served this country from its inception. In my particular case, my oldest known ancestor, again, Ishmael Titus, that was born in 1746, it just so happens that as a 10-year-old boy, he was thrust on a horse and was to support General Edward Braddock's mission to go off and fight against the French and the Indians. So, and that was in the early 1755. And considering that as an older young man, he was then thrust into the position to fight as a Revolutionary War hero, or Revolutionary War soldier, and then lived to be the last living survivor of Edward Braddock's defeat, passing away in 1755. So in my continued untold stories, as we would say, of my Titus family lineage, we've had documented well over 100 family members that have served this country in every American battle here in this country. So we're honored to be in that position. And then to include myself being a military Marine veteran myself. So it's strong.
One thing I'll add to this is when you research your own family, military records, et cetera, you're also inadvertently researching other people's records because a lot of the records are intermingled. So basically with everyone researching, we can get more and more information. So there is a benefit, not just for your family, but all the other families. So you may find records that show he was serving, but here's these other people he was serving with, and they may not have any idea.
I'm trying to remember exactly what the question was, but but I think it was the value of learning about the stories. I think, you know, anytime you can go beyond just the facts of dates and places and names is valuable because it helps put your ancestors in context and really helps you understand where you come from. And I think it's especially important that we hear the stories of the whole population of who was living in a place during a time. And so that's especially important, I think, when we're talking about Black military records in the early years of this country, is to know that there were more than just the white people fighting. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
The research side of our questions. What are the biggest obstacles in tracing Black ancestors who served in the American Revolutionary War or early U.S. conflicts, and I guess we should probably expand it out to all U.S. conflicts?
Yeah, so I think one of the big challenges is just, you know, any federal records prior to the 1870 census really didn't have a lot of information about non-white residents. And so you're looking at You're looking for people who are identified by only their first name, sometimes no name at all. You're looking for people sometimes under the name of their enslaver. And so that's a big challenge when you're trying to identify, who is connected to whom, is just having that fuzzy picture of names. So that's the biggest one I see.
Another big obstacle that applies to records in general is the inconsistency, the missing records. So you may be researching in one area, maybe a county, they've got a great set of records, the next county has 0. The records got created, they've just been lost for various reasons. You hear about the courthouse fires, sometimes they just didn't keep them, they didn't think they were important and they tossed them. So the inconsistency in the records is a very difficult challenge, because if there's no records, you really don't have much else to go on.
In my particular case, I have to keep it real with you folks. In my particular case, it was more spiritual in the records. I did not set out to find military personnel or military families serving this country. I set myself out on a journey based on information that was given to me by my grandfather before he passed away. And it just so happens that I uncovered our Ishmael Titus and the lineage of the Titus Africans that was here in this country. And what that did for me was compel me and give me purpose, to understand the purpose of what actually took place and what happened with hundreds of African American soldiers that have served this country, either free or enslaved. And what it was for me, as well as my entire family, knowing that we had been spread all across the United States because of slavery, it brought us more closer to understanding who we are and where we come from and why we are the way we are and why America is the way it is. So what it did for me and my family was to give us a more spiritual grounding in what actually took place. Because if you know and you think about it, and what happened with the news this morning and what's been happening in our generation and in our time, America has been fighting wars since its inception. And it just so happens that we happen to fall into the fold. So again, I didn't have a lot of problems looking into the research and things that took place, a lot of problems trying to find this and find that. Everything's been written. Everything's been documented. And if you're spiritually grounded, those things will come to the forefront for you. So that's pretty much where I stand with it.
As far as my family goes, my biggest obstacle so far is I haven't just gotten out and looked into the Civil War records. I found my family in every war all the way back prior, just after the Civil War, but I haven't looked for my family members in the Civil War records yet, so I don't know if any of my family members fought in the Civil War. We were from the South. We were from York County, South Carolina. I found my family enslaved in York County, South Carolina in 1822, and I was able to trace them out of slavery. 9 times out of 10, a slave was not a soldier in the Civil War unless, the slave owner took that slave to war with them, which that happened a lot. And the other obstacle I've ran into that I'm working on is I need to find my 1822 ancestor. I need to find their parents to trace them back further, earlier than 1822, to get back into the Revolutionary period and to see if they were here then or not. They may have come here after the Revolutionary War. I don't know. I've had the DNA test, and I know where I came from in Africa. I've traced my family back to 1822, and I know where I came from here in the United States in 1822. It's that time period in between there that I still need to find out. There are plenty of records out there. You just have to go and get them and go through them and look at them one at a time. Luckily, most of them are indexed, and so you can look for your family's surname and see if any of those surnames match yours and see if that person is related to you.
Thank you. Which historical sources prove most useful in uncovering these ancestors?
Well, my most useful source in the beginning was word of mouth, because when you start doing your family history, you start off with yourself and you write down everything you know about yourself, and then everything you know about your relatives, until you get to a point where you don't know anything about your relatives. Then you have to go start asking them questions. Once you run out of people to ask questions to because everybody else has gone on, then you have to go out and start researching people in the different records. Things like census records, death certificates, birth certificates, things of that nature. And that's the way that you continue to trace your family further back. The one thing you need to do before it's too late is to talk to your elders and have a recorder there, and don't interrupt them when they start talking, so that you can get everything that they know and get it written down, so that you can have a first-hand history of what your family was when they grew up.
Well, I'm sitting here smiling, and the reason being, when I was a younger Marine, I would come home on vacation and I would sit down with my grandfather and I would talk to him about who the elders were when he was a child coming up. And it got to a point when I went to Grandpa's house and I would walk in and I had my green military sternal book, and he said, "I guess we're gonna be having a conversation today, right?" I said, "Yeah, Grandpa, we're gonna have a conversation." So what happened is that 12 years after my grandfather passed away, I was sitting in my home office, and it just so happens that a commercial came on television. And that commercial was Ancestry.com, or Ancestry. And I told myself, "Solomon, I think it's time for you to look into the information that you received from your grandfather." So in my case, I was actually looking for my great-great-grandfather, who was born in 1845 in Maysville, South Carolina. And I figured if I find my great-great-grandfather, who my grandfather had gave me his name, along with his wife, I would find the African, because that was a time period of slavery. So if I found 1845, that would give me some understanding and my connection to my great-great-grandfather. But it just so happens that once I went into that rabbit hole, I find myself digging very, very deep. And all of a sudden, Mr. Ancestry.com started showing up with all of these leaves. And then I found that my great-great-grandfather that was born in 1845 was the last of 12 boys that was born into slavery between 1810 and 1845. And then that story took me again even further into the 1700s, and then that story took me into the 1600s of England. So my curiosity peaked real high. And then come to find out that I found the Titus family crest from Silas Titus in the Silas Titus lineage that came out of England, but had ties to the 15th and 16th century of the Jolliffe Empire. So as I'm sitting here sharing this with you today, I went down a rabbit hole and came back out with all the treasures of my lineage here in this world. So thank you.
One thing, because the question asked historical sources, there's ones you think about, records from the military, from the Department of Defense, pension records, things like that, but you can find military service in other records. For example, court records. You may not be aware, but until just after the Civil War, the North Carolina county courts also handled the county government. So you can go through these court records and see things like Mrs. So-and-so's husband died in the war and we're going to give her some money just because, you know, we're being charitable. That may be the only record you have that her husband passed away or was in this particular war that they're talking about. So there's lots of other records to look at in addition to just the standard one, wills, estate records, and things like that. So always keep in mind that the records you're looking for might not be where you think they are.
So I'll talk about the more standard records. So I would say always my go-to would be pension records. So Revolutionary War pension records, Civil War pension records, the USCT records. These are all available through the National Archives. The almost all Revolutionary War pension records are digitized. But they can be a wealth of information. I have a 180-page pension file from my 3-times great-grandfather Civil War record. So it can just tell you a bunch about their military service, as well as about their family, their neighbors, and add all kinds of details. So I would definitely always check those out.
How do professional genealogists handle missing or inconsistent records, especially for enslaved individuals who might not appear in official documents?
So any genealogy, you're always going to find contradictions, whether it's in spelling of names, whether it's relationships. So you always want to double check anything you find. So if you find it in one place, you always want to find it in more than one place. Part of what you're looking at is, are the same people around this person that I found? If I think that they had a close relationship, a friend, a neighbor, a relative of a certain name, I would look for information about that other person if I'm not finding it about the specific person I went to research about initially. So you can always kind of look at those people on the periphery of your ancestor to dig more, looking at things like their estate files, their own military records, because again, if you look in a pension file for somebody they might have known, you might find the person you're looking for who has been documented giving an affidavit, attesting to somebody's service, and things like that.
Yeah, what Katie said, I mean, basically, you just have to have thorough searches, and there are people you hear about who've been looking at a particular person for like 20 years, just trying to go through all the records, and eventually they'll find someone, or sometimes you're just not going to find it. That's the unfortunate part. But you do want to make sure that when you do find what you think is your person or whoever you're looking for, that you do have decent evidence to do that. There's so much out there, especially, you mentioned Ancestry, there's a lot of things out there where people just make these assumptions and there's nothing to back them up. So with genealogy, we need sources. There's a famous saying, genealogy without sources is fiction. You need to find this document that can help prove your cause.
And you have to be mindful that during the time period in our particular African case, they spoke a certain language, and their dialect could have been a little bit off. And the census takers would hear one thing and write another. So you would have different contradictions when it comes down to naming, different contradictions when it comes down to times of birth and things of that nature. So it's just, you have to cross-reference and do your due diligence in order for you to find exactly what you want. And then again, if you, as an amateur, as I was and still am, I go to the professionals because sometimes things are written a certain way in the documents, and you're not in a position to transcribe those things, so you would have to go to a professional to transcribe certain words that are written from that time period in order for you to get a better understanding.
Yep. One of the first things most of you are probably going to do whenever you're doing family research is you're going to go directly to the census records, right? And how often are the census records written down? Once every 10 years. So there's a 10-year gap between one time frame that you're looking for an ancestor and another time frame that you're looking for an ancestor. And what could have happened in that 10 years? Someone could have been born and someone could have died, right? And you'll never know that that person ever lived just by using the census records. And so you have to use not just the census record. You start with the census record. That's a good starting point. But then what you want to do is go to things like birth certificates, death certificates, any other types of military records. Those things occurred in the middles of the decade. And it tells you, I can't tell you how many of my ancestors that I found that I never would have found had I not found birth and death certificates. But birth and death certificates also have their problem. In North and South Carolina, birth and death certificates were not issued until after 1910. Prior to 1910, there was no birth certificates or death certificates issued in the states of North and South Carolina. What would be the best way prior to 1910 to find out information about the birth date or the death date of a relative?
Family Bibles.
That's it. Family Bibles and church records. That's another one. Because church records, every church kept a record of each person buried at their church. It would tell you the date that they were buried. A lot of times it would tell you the date they died, all that stuff. Another place is funeral home records. Funeral homes have been around since the beginning of the country. And those records, most of them, not all of them, but most of those records have been kept. And so you can go to funeral homes and find, because what you're trying to do is find information about family members that occurred between that 10-year census period so that you can find out whether or not you had a relative that was, say, maybe born in 1933 and died in 1935. You would never know that unless you looked at a record other than the census records. And prior to when they started issuing birth and death certificates, those church records and those family Bibles and they do have in archives, they do have, people have given their family Bibles to those archives, so you can go look them up. Okay. The record that I found most useful in my family research, I started my research in the mid-1980s. My father was born in 1911. He was the second generation freed person. His father was a first generation freed person. He was born in 1878. His father was born a slave. And so I sat down with my father and I sat down with all of his first cousins and I wrote down their story. And I got it on paper in their words. Most of you can't do that now because, you know, this is 2026. You know, you can't get back as far as I was able to get because I was talking to people that was born in 1911, 1912, 1917. You probably don't know anybody alive that was born in those days. My father has two first cousins still living. One is 102, the other is 93. And every time I talk to them till they get tired of me and hang the phone up because I try to get everything out of them that I can. But what you want to do is get those years in between the census also. Get the census out of the way first, okay? And not everything on the census is going to be right, what they told you. I found my great-great-grandfather in 1870 at 47 years old. In 1880, he was 55 years old. So he only gained 8 years in 10 years. So those are things you have to look at when you're looking at census records. But other records like death certificates, birth certificates, and things of that nature, those are very, very accurate. One other thing about birth and death certificates, it tells you the names of the parent of the person that's on that birth or death certificate, and it gives the most precious thing that you ever want to find, the mother's maiden name. That is an obstacle that everybody is going to run into, because when you're tracing your female relatives, when they get married, their last name changes, and you can't find them anywhere unless you know what their maiden name was. I didn't mean to go that long.
Yeah, this next question, the panel has already addressed to some degree, but I would like for them to enhance this a little bit and tell us how you access such places as a funeral home or church records in terms of gaining entree. So the question is this: are there regional or local archives that people often overlook when tracing early black military service?
The answer to that is yes, because almost every county in the country has a local genealogical society. In fact, this pretty young lady over here is part of a local genealogical society. And those are places that do research like that, and they have records like that available to the public to come in and use for free. Local libraries also have that same information. State archives have that same information.
I concur, and I'm going to pass it.
Yeah, and again, North Carolina is pretty unique in the country in that when they founded the archives back in the early 1900s, they told the county, send us all your stuff. So pretty much the bulk of the old records ended up in Raleigh. One exception is deeds. The deeds pretty much stayed with the county. And one problem you're going to run into is your ancestors didn't sit still. They moved to different counties. So you kind of have one shop stopping there. There are also resources like at UNC, Chapel Hill, Wilson Library. They have something called the Southern Historical Collection. A lot of that is private papers from individuals who could have very well been, they were the more wealthy individuals, so chances are they were enslavers as well. So you can find lots of information in their private papers. And as libraries were mentioned, something you'll hear about are called vertical files. And basically, if someone's done a lot of research on a family, they might donate all their research materials to the library, and so you'll go look up your name and you'll find someone's already done all the work for you. Now, don't trust it until you can verify it. There's also books. Some people go to the extreme where they've written an entire book called the So-and-so Family History, and you'll be able to find that in a library. And those are always good starting points. Not necessarily proof of anything, because some of them are pretty bad about sources, but there are lots of places to look other than just the traditional places.
I'm going to let you keep it because I think you did well.
Okay. Then you get to answer the next.
Okay.
Would anyone say, how do you access a funeral home? How do you access a funeral home?
Well, that's really tricky because they're pretty much private. There is some local it was actually the one in Danville, Virginia. They had a whole shelf of funeral home records. But that's unusual because, again, they're private. And a lot of times a funeral home, like the little family funeral home, gets bought by the giant corporate funeral home, and they're really hard to break through. So funeral home records are pretty tough. But cemeteries, we didn't discuss, I think hopefully people are aware of the site Find a Grave and Billion Graves. There are several sites where people have gone through and photographed tombstones from all over the country. I mean, they have hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, and you can go search there to see if you can find where someone was buried.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Sorry, real quick. So even if the funeral home records are hard to access, if you have the actual burial location in the cemetery itself, you can often get cemetery records from the cemetery office.
Thank you. Genealogy as a descendant is our next category. How did discovering this connection change your understanding of your family history?
I guess I'll start with that one. Changing the dynamics of the family's history is one of, again, understanding and knowing who you are and where you come from. And it just so happens that in our family research and finding family members, for an example, like I said, you know, we found family members that came up out of Maysville, South Carolina between 1810 and 1845. And it just so happens that in Maysville, South Carolina, what I did was I targeted those that were in that area of Maysville and Sumter, South Carolina, because that's a place where I used to be taken as a child. My grandparents, my parents would always take us back to South Carolina every summer. And coming from New York, we always wondered why, when we come down here, we have to take a bath in a big old basin tub. Why, when we come down here, we have to pump water from the well in order to drink it? Why, when we come down here, we're living in houses that sit on stilts? And why don't we have a bathroom? Because we have to now go to the outhouse. But it just so happens that my journey going back and forth as a child until I joined the Marines at 18 years old, I wanted to focus on what I knew of Maysville, South Carolina, and finding 6 individuals or 6 families out of Maysville, South Carolina is what I targeted. So when you learn that one was taken out of the area in 1852 and taken out to Texas by the slaveholder, and then when you uncover finding these family members and you start talking to these family members and you realize that you have so much in common about who you are, how you carry yourself, the things that you do, and then it's across the spectrum of all your family members, it's an aha moment. Like, wow, so that's really us. That's how we have evolved. And we all have so many common interests and similarities in what we do and how we move in life. And then, again, understanding the spiritual aspect of it. The prayers that went up from our elders to cover us. The prayers that went up for our elders for us to be stronger and do better than what they had to come through. So in these situations, and then bringing our families together, for an example, in 2024, right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, we were able to bring over 125 family members to the Charlotte area for a Titus family reunion. And out of those 110 people, those were not just large families. Those were heads of families from all across the United States, to include London and Jamaica, because we had some family members that after the Civil War, they decided that they no longer wanted to be here in the United States. So they took the boat back across the waters. So it just so happens, again, we have the same similarities and commonalities that keeps us strong and connected as a family. So in my particular stand, pretty much being the head of the research, the voice of our Titus lineage, we all understand that it's a bigger picture. It's bigger than us. It's bigger than us in reference that we have to make sure that our children understand who they are and where they come from. We have to make sure that our children are educated in the proper way and knowing that there is a covering over you. And once you stray from under the covering of the blessings that's been bestowed on us, you're at the mercy of whatever takes place in this cruel country that we live in called America. So we have to make sure that we do our due diligence, make sure that we stay strong, make sure that we cover our children for generations to come in order for all of us to live under God's purpose.
I guess my biggest aha moment was when I was tracing my ancestors back. I can probably ask each and every one of you, everybody in here knows who their mama and their daddy were, right? What about your grandma and grandpa? Now when I start asking you about great-grandma and great-grandpa, I bet you can't name all of them. And so when you get to great-great-grandma and grandpa, most people have no idea. And my aha moment was that I became the first person in my family to find my great-great-grandfather on the 1870 census. Okay, now I didn't just subtract 47 from 1870 to get the year that he was born. I mean, I estimated the year that he was born was 1822, but I wanted to know where he came from. And so my aha moment was the fact that in order to find him, I had to research the slave-owning family and find his name on their records. And what I did was I had to go start out Easter egging, looking at everybody with my last name and looking at their records at the courthouse, things like probate records, last will and testaments, to see if I could find my great-great-grandfather's name. And I got lucky and I found his name. And when I found his name, I was able to trace him. In fact, the age that they gave in 1870 was just about correct. And I was able to trace him on those people's records all the way out of slavery. And so I was able to find him and see that I had found the right person. I traced him from 1822 to 1830 to 1838 when this person died and left his name on his last will and testament. 1840, he was on the census record as a slave. In 1852, all the way up until 1865. And so I was able to trace him out. I didn't just find him on the 1870 census and say, okay, I found you in 1822. I found him on those records, and I've got documented those records in my family history books that show that he was somebody and he lived through those times.
Okay, this next question is connected to the previous question. How has uncovering these stories of service influenced your sense of identity, legacy, or connection to the broader history of Black Americans?
Well, most of my ancestors and relatives that I knew in the military are contemporaries. They lived recently. But then when I started researching my family, I found several relatives. I found their military records where they fought in the Korean War, and their military records and all the information on that. Then when I went further back, I found those who had fought in World War II. And then my biggest aha was the World War I draft records that I found of my relatives. And the information that you find on these records is mind-blowing because it gives you insight into what they were going through. it even tells you what ships they were shipped out on to go overseas to the war. It tells you when they were shipped back in, the dates that they were shipped back in, and the dates that they were released from the military. I had no idea that I had uncles that even fought in those wars. No one had ever said anything about it, and I was able to find that information out.
Can you recite that question again, please?
How has uncovering these stories of service influenced your sense of identity, legacy, or connection to the broader history of Black Americans?
Let me share this with you. As a young man born in 1960 and understanding what took place during that time of civil rights, understanding that I never thought about anything in reference to joining the military, and I know a lot of my cousins that I've spoken with over the years never thought of anything about joining the military, and they asked me, Solomon, why did you do it? I said, well, Mom and Dad was a construction worker. Mom was a secretary at Bausch & Lomb, the optical place in Rochester, New York, and I was the oldest of 7 kids. And the school systems said that my parents made enough money to pay for me to go to college. And I said, no, that's a lie, because Mama got 7 kids, and there's no way they're gonna be able to pay for me to go to college. And on top of that, I know for a fact I'm not gonna be paying no college bills for the rest of my life after I get out of college. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna join the military and let the military pay for my education. That's the track that I took. So saying that to say this, the inspiration, the guidance, the understanding of what's inside the man compels me to relay these same ideas and informations to my entire family. And again, as I stated, knowing that they had the same convictions growing up in life, and knowing that our convictions were the exact same convictions of those that became before us. They wanted to do better, grow better, understand things better. So it inspires us. It inspires us. And it should inspire generations to come, as long as we got the lights on this nation, to do better and grow better. But one thing that keeps us strong, and we'll never ever should be not reminded about it: know who you are, know where you come from, understanding that, for me, I never read Mark Twain, but when I did read something from Mark Twain said, the 2 most important days of your life, the day that you were born and the day that you found out the reason why. Live in your purpose. You can't live in anybody else's purpose in this life. Live in your purpose, and you will be able to see the goodness, the grace, and the mercy of God by living in your purpose. And that's where I stand with my entire family, all 10, 15,000 of them across the United States, to include London and Jamaica. Live in your purpose and things will be fine. Stay under the covering of God, and things will be fine. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, we're going to move on to researching. How did DNA and genetic genealogy complement traditional archival research in identifying black military ancestors?
No, it's good. It's good. So I think obviously the DNA results themselves are not going to lead you to the information that you're looking for, right? So what is essential with DNA, and I was talking to somebody up in the research room about this just a little while ago, is seeing who else you are connected to. So when you get your DNA results, you know, it's interesting to see, oh, I'm 13% this and 70% that, but what you really want to do is see who you are matched with and who they are matched with and find your common links, because that's going to help cluster you with your relatives, and you can narrow down, okay, if this is the line, I think it's my paternal line, so my father's line, who was in the military, who else am I connected to genetically in that line that might have some information that I could use that helps connect me to my relative. If I don't know exactly who mine was, but the person, fifth cousin or something, knows who their ancestor was, those are the connections that I want to make that are going to help kind of fill in the gaps.
And just to clarify, because some of y'all might not be familiar with what DNA does with genealogy, we're not digging up great-grandma and pulling out her bones or whatever. What it does is it compares your DNA against other living people who have tested. So in other words, it can only compare you to someone else who has tested, and then they'd see how much you have in common. So that's what Katie was mentioning. You can find people that says, oh, look, this person's pretty close to you. Maybe they're a second cousin that you never knew existed, because there are plenty of those out there, things like that. So it's important to know what DNA is doing. It's simply comparing you against everyone else who's tested. And it also means if someone hasn't tested, you're not going to know you're related to them. So I know a lot of people are reluctant to do DNA testing, and I fully understand that, but that's the only way to figure some of this stuff out. The other thing I like to say about DNA is, as Katie also kind of said, it's not going to have the name of your ancestor in there, but it can definitely prove you're not related to someone. You can see that, wow, we have no DNA in common, we thought we're related, maybe we're not. So you got to be prepared to find out things you might not want to find out about. And that has happened. There's stories left and right of someone finding out, you know, that they were actually raised by, they thought the person who was their mother was really their grandmother, just all sorts of things like that.
In my particular case, and I hope it would be your case as well, the DNA that the Titus Family Foundation conducted had to be specific. Not just finding connections of family members, because that's what it did, but what that DNA did for our particular family is that it gave us, again, remember we talked about purpose? It gave us, again, a deeper connection. And I don't want to, well, yeah, I'm going to say it. Oftentimes when I'm speaking to family members or speaking in engagements, I would let persons know that sometimes I may say something and it will go right over the top of your head because you can't even fathom what's about to take place. And the reason I say that is because our DNA took us back to who we really are as a people. And what I say about who we really are as a people, for an example, we all come from somebody somewhere. And in our particular case, we are the children of the Fulani Africans of West Africa, Cameroon, Gabon, Sierra Leone, Ghana. We are Fulani Africans that dates back to the 15th and 16th century of the Jollof Empire. We are the Fulani Africans that dates back to the 15th and 16th century of the Jollof Empire, during a time period when Africa ruled. And then, with the destruction of the black continent, the kingdoms, kings and queens that warred against themselves, and then those wars escalated when the Europeans showed up, when the Scandinavians showed up, when the French showed up, and when the Americans showed up and destroyed that continent of its people and of its riches. And when you find out that your bloodline dates back to the 15th and 16th century of the Jollof Empire, it changes you. It awakens you to who you really are, because that was the hub of civilization. That was the hub of education, theology, all the things that you can imagine that was going on during that time period. And fast forward, I stand before you today as Solomon Titus, a Fulani child of the 15th and 16th century of the Jollof Empire. Thank you.
I don't know if my DNA took me there or not. I did take the DNA test, and the main thing I wanted to find out from my DNA was how African was I? And because what I found out, what I know is, if you see this young man right here, you see his hair? That's what my daddy's hair looked like, okay? And he was almost as light-skinned as he is, okay? And my mother was she was darker than me. She was about his color. But I found out that the most European I am came from my mother's side of the family. And that in my African ancestry, both of them came from Nigeria, but my father's side was the most Nigerian. And so the most African I am came from my father's side of the family, but it came from both sides. I found out that I'm 85% African, 15% European. When I first went on Ancestry to compare my DNA to other people, there were two people that popped up there right in the beginning, and both of them were my nephew. And the Ancestry said, these guys are either your half-brothers or your nephews. And so they got that right. And I found several other family members on Ancestry DNA that had taken the test, and I know that they're my nieces and nephews and cousins, and they all also popped up on there. So the good thing about DNA testing is that it helps you, number one, to know who your family members are. The other thing you want to know about DNA is you could have a cousin and have absolutely no DNA in common with them, because it's the way that the DNA gets passed down through the generations. Okay, it's because of the way it gets passed down through the generations. You may be related to them, but you may not have any DNA in common with them whatsoever.
Our final question for this session is, how can attendees begin to uncover their own family's black military history, even if they're starting from scratch?
Starting from scratch, the first place I tell you to go to is to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. because it has the most military, well, it has all the military records that are for public consumption in those archives. And the reason I say go to the National Archives is because not every record is on the internet yet, right? Ancestry and Family Search are trying to get most of the records on the internet, but they're not all out there yet. So if you hadn't gotten to Washington, D.C. yet, go to, I tell you, familysearch.org first, because it's free, and then go to ancestry.com. Now, you can get ancestry.com for free also. Just go to your local public library, and you can use ancestry.com for free and look up military records associated with your family. But if you can't find them on Ancestry or Family Search, you have to go to where the record is, which is in the National Archive, or I think they also kept military records in the different counties in which the people lived, and the state archives took all the county records and accumulated them into the state archives. So look for county records, for the draft boards, then go to the state archives, go to go to Family Search first, then go to Ancestry, then go to the National Archives.
What he said.
I will mention again, Family Search has been digitizing records for decades and decades, and there's a new thing they've come out with in the past 2 years where they have used AI to read the handwriting. So people are making discoveries every day on records, because you get a record of a bunch of papers that's 10,000 things to look through. You just can't look through it looking for a particular name, but they have indexed it now so you can search on that name. The other thing, and AI's got its problems, but one thing it can also do is what's called contextual search. So for example, we're dealing with someone who's enslaved and all you know is their name is Henry. If I do a search on Henry, I'm going to get every Henry that exists, but I can tell it to search on Henry without a last name, only Henry by itself, and that might uncover records. So AI is really helping this out as well. And again, if you go to Family Search, which is free, you'll see an option called full text search, and that will search every single word. They haven't done anywhere near the number of records they have, but you might be lucky and find a hit on some sort of record you didn't even know existed.
Well, I know we're tight on time, so I don't have much to add, except that if you want to come up to the Family Research Center on the second floor, we can help you get started.
Perfect.
Okay, everyone, thank you for coming. Let's give our panel a round of applause, and please feel free to talk to them after the session.